She sold her mother's wedding ring for $200 and sewed the coins into her petticoat. Then she boarded a train to marry a man she had never met. What Evelyn Hart did not know was that her future husband had already killed 2 women. And he had chosen her specifically because her father had discovered his secret. She was not his bride. She was his next victim. But there was another man waiting in the shadows, a cowboy who had lost his own wife to this monster. And when he looked at Evelyn stepping off that train, he saw a woman walking straight into a grave. He had one chance to save her, and this time he was not going to be afraid. This story will show you something powerful. Sometimes the most desperate choice becomes your greatest blessing. Sometimes the stranger who seems like your enemy is the only one willing to fight for your survival. And sometimes you have to lose everything before you discover how strong you really are. If you have ever felt trapped with no way out, this story is for you. This is a tale about second chances, about finding courage when fear has ruled your whole life, about 2 broken people who saved each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of everything they lost. It reminds us that we are never truly alone, that help can come from unexpected places, and that the right choice is not always the safe choice. Now settle in and let this journey begin. If this story moves you, hit that like button. It tells me you want more tales like this one. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let us begin. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the empty parlor like a death knell. Mahogany desk, imported hardware, brass fittings. Do I hear $20? That desk was where her father had taught her to read ledgers, where he had shown her how numbers told the real story behind polite business talk. Always look at what the numbers say, Evelyn, he had told her. Men lie. Numbers do not. The numbers had told the truth in the end. They revealed every bad investment, every loan taken against future income that never came, every desperate attempt to recover losses by risking more. 25. 30. Sold. The desk disappeared through the door. November cold seeped through the walls. They had stopped paying for coal 2 months ago. Evelyn had been burning furniture in the kitchen stove just to keep one room warm enough for survival. She could not watch anymore. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, grateful that her few remaining possessions were protected by law. A bed, a trunk, clothing, personal items that creditors could not touch. The judge had made it clear that his mercy extended no further. You have until Wednesday, Miss Hart. After that, the property transfers to Mr. Holbrook to satisfy the primary debt. You will need to make other arrangements. Other arrangements. The phrase was a polite fiction. Women of her class did not make arrangements. They relied on family. But her mother's people had disowned her father years ago. They relied on marriage. But what man wanted a penniless woman with no dowry, no connections, and a father who died in debt and scandal? Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, looking down at the street. Boston's November afternoon was gray and bitter. People hurried past, bundled in wool, their breath steaming. Normal people with normal lives, heading to warm homes and hot dinners and futures that extended beyond 48 hours. She had tried everything. She had swallowed her pride and called on her mother's former friends, women who had taken tea in the parlor below. Every door had closed politely but firmly. Some had not even opened. She had visited employment agencies. Can you cook? Not really. Sew? Only basic mending. Governess experience? None. She was educated, could keep accounts, read Latin and French, play piano. All useless skills for a woman who needed wages. I'm sorry, miss, the last agent had said. You are not qualified for governess work. No references. You are overqualified for household service. Employers do not trust educated girls. They cause trouble. And you are too old to train as apprentice to a trade. Too old. She was 23. The trunk beside her bed held everything she owned now. 3 dresses, undergarments, her mother's pearl earrings and wedding ring, a cameo brooch, her father's pocket watch, though it had stopped working months ago, a book of Shakespeare's sonnets, a silver hairbrush, and an envelope. She had been carrying it in her pocket for 2 weeks. The paper was soft from handling. She did not need to open it. She had memorized every word. But she took it out anyway, unfolding it carefully, reading it again by the gray afternoon light. Miss Hart, my name is Marcus Webb. I own a cattle ranch outside Stillwater, Montana territory. I am writing in response to your notice in the matrimonial news. I am 35 years old. I have owned my ranch for 8 years. The land is good. The house is comfortable. I employ several men year-round and additional hands during roundup. I am not merely solvent. I am prosperous. I am not a young man seeking romance. I am a practical man seeking a partner. I offer comfort, security, and respect. In return, I ask only for honesty and companionship. I understand you have recently suffered the loss of your father. Please accept my condolences. I know something of unfortunate business dealings and their aftermath. If you choose to accept, I will send money for passage. Should you arrive and find the situation intolerable, I will provide return fare, no questions asked. The choice is yours. Marcus Webb. The letter had arrived like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. She had placed the advertisement in desperation 3 months ago, when the creditors first started circling. A small notice in the back pages of a paper she found at the lending library. Boston lady, educated, good family, seeks correspondence with respectable gentlemen interested in matrimony. She had received 14 responses. 5 had been obscene. 4 had been from men clearly looking for servants, not wives. 3 had been from elderly widowers seeking nurses. 1 had been barely literate and frankly terrifying. And 1 had been from Marcus Webb. Different from the others, polished, educated, offering not just escape, but dignity. What Evelyn did not know, could not know, was that Marcus Webb had not stumbled upon her advertisement by chance. He had been watching for it, waiting for it. Because Marcus Webb was the business partner who had destroyed her father. And now he was coming for her. Downstairs, the auctioneer's voice rose with enthusiasm. Steinway piano, 1851. Rosewood case, ivory keys, excellent tone. Evelyn closed her eyes. That piano had been her mother's pride. Some of her clearest memories were of her mother playing in the evening, her father reading nearby, everything feeling safe and permanent and good. Before the cough, before the slow decline. Before death had taken her mother, and left Evelyn with a father who tried to drown his grief in cards and whiskey, and increasingly desperate business ventures. She heard the bidding climb, 50, 75, 100. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her pocket. Wednesday morning she would walk out of this house with 1 trunk and no destination except a train platform. She would travel 2,000 miles to marry a man whose face she had never seen, whose voice she had never heard, whose character she knew only through carefully composed letters that might or might not reflect truth. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was the only choice she had. That night, Evelyn packed her trunk by candlelight. 3 dresses, the brown wool for daily wear, the gray silk for evening, the black bombazine she was still wearing for her father. She removed her mother's wedding ring from its velvet box. For a long moment, she held it in her palm, feeling its weight. Her mother had worn this ring for 22 years. Then she walked to the pawnbroker on Milk Street and sold it for $200 in gold coins. The pawnbroker looked at her with something like pity. "This is worth 3 times what I'm giving you." "I know," Evelyn said, "but I need the money tonight." Back in her room, she unpicked the hem of her petticoat and sewed the coins inside. Then she added something else, a small folding knife with a pearl handle. Her mother had given it to her on her 16th birthday. For emergencies, her mother had said, her eyes serious. A woman should always have a way to protect herself. Evelyn had laughed then. What kind of emergency would require a knife? She was not laughing now. She finished packing just before dawn. Then she sat by the window and watched the sun rise over Boston for the last time. Her thoughts drifted to that night 2 years ago. The night her mother fell gravely ill. Evelyn had been alone in the house. Her father was at his club. The servants had been dismissed months earlier to cut costs. Her mother's breathing had turned shallow, ragged, wrong. Evelyn knew she should fetch the doctor, but her father's voice echoed in her head. Never let anyone know about our troubles. Never give them reason to gossip. So she had waited, hoping it would pass. Hoping her father would come home. Hoping she would not have to make a decision that might expose the family's shame. By the time her father returned at midnight, her mother was barely conscious. The doctor came too late. 3 days later, her mother was dead. And Evelyn had spent every day since knowing that her hesitation, her cowardice, her inability to act when it mattered most had cost her mother her life. She had sworn she would never be that afraid again. But she was. The train station was chaos. Evelyn stood on the platform with her trunk at her feet, buffeted by crowds of people shouting goodbyes. The late November morning was bitterly cold. Her breath steamed in the air. She needed the westbound Continental, the train that would carry her across half the country. She had studied the route obsessively. Boston to Chicago, Chicago to Omaha, Omaha to Cheyenne, Cheyenne to Stillwater, Montana Territory. 10 days of travel, 10 days to reconsider, 10 days to talk herself out of this madness. Continental Express, all aboard for Chicago. The train sat massive and steaming on the tracks, its engine breathing like a dragon. Evelyn picked up her trunk and joined the line of passengers climbing aboard. A woman nearby was crying, clinging to an older man. "I will write every week," she sobbed. "I promise." Evelyn looked away. There was no one to cry with her, no one to promise letters to. She had said goodbye to the empty house that morning, locked the door, and handed the key to the estate attorney. He had barely acknowledged her. The transaction was complete. The creditors were satisfied. She was simply a loose end, now tied off. The passenger car was already half full. She found a seat near the back, hoisted her trunk onto the overhead rack, and settled by the window. The train jerked once, then again. The wheels began to turn. Evelyn pressed her hand against the window glass as the station started to slide past. Faster now, the city opening up around her. Buildings and streets and church spires she had known her entire life. Boston disappeared behind her. She sat back against the hard bench and folded her hands in her lap. There was no turning back now. The journey was long. Chicago was noise and smoke and overwhelming crowds. Evelyn had 3 hours between trains, which she spent in the station waiting room, guarding her trunk and trying not to be jostled. The westbound train was rougher. Older cars, harder seats, more crowded. Nebraska was flat, impossibly, endlessly flat. Mile after mile of prairie grass and huge sky and nothing else. At night she dozed fitfully, her head against the window. Her back ached, her neck was stiff. She was hungry and tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Wyoming was mountains, real mountains. Not the rolling hills of New England, but massive peaks that tore into the sky. The train climbed through them, engine laboring. Evelyn stared out at landscape that looked like another planet. Beautiful, terrifying, completely alien. This was cattle country, Marcus Webb's country. The reality of what she was doing hit her in waves. She was going to marry a stranger. She was going to live on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. She was going to spend the rest of her life in this empty, enormous land where the sky was too big and the distances were too great. Her hands started shaking. She gripped them together, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She could not fall apart now, not when she had come this far, not when there was no going back. The train rolled north through the afternoon. The sun sank toward the western horizon, painting the plains gold and amber. The conductor walked through, calling out stops. Wolf Creek, next stop Stillwater, Stillwater. Her heart started racing. The train began to slow. Through the window she saw lights in the distance, a small cluster of buildings. The town, her destination, the end of the journey, the beginning of everything else. The train hissed to a stop. Evelyn stood on shaking legs and pulled her trunk down from the rack. She stepped out onto the platform. It was small, just a wooden structure with a roof and a single lantern. The town beyond was mostly dark. The air was shockingly cold, sharp enough to hurt her lungs. And the silence. After 10 days of train noise, the silence felt enormous. She looked around for Marcus Webb. No one was waiting. 1 hour passed, then 2. The station clerk watched her through the window but did not come out. The other passengers had long since dispersed. Evelyn stood alone in the freezing dark, her trunk at her feet, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. Then footsteps crunched on frozen ground. A tall figure emerged from the darkness, wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, heavy coat, broad shoulders. He stopped 10 feet away. "Miss Hart." His voice was deep, quiet, careful, and cold. "I am Lucas Reed. Marcus asked me to fetch you. He is occupied with cattle business." Evelyn studied the stranger. Weathered face, storm-gray eyes that seemed to be evaluating her, rough hands, no smiles. No, he was not what she expected, not what she had hoped for, but he was here, and Marcus Webb was not. "How far is Mr. Webb's ranch?" 20 miles. Long ride in the dark. Lucas Reed loaded her trunk into a waiting wagon with economical movements. "We will stop at my place first. Warm up. Start fresh in the morning. I would prefer to go directly to my intended's home." Lucas looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Frustration. And something else. Something that looked almost like pity. "Suit yourself, Miss Hart." He helped her into the wagon. His hand was rough with calluses, but surprisingly gentle. The wagon lurched into motion, carrying her into the Montana night. Evelyn watched the station lantern grow smaller behind them until it disappeared entirely, leaving only darkness and the sound of hooves on frozen ground, and the feeling, growing stronger with every mile, that she was riding toward something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The wagon creaked through darkness so complete that Evelyn could barely see her own hands in her lap. Stars burned overhead, more than she had ever seen in Boston. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. Under other circumstances, she might have found it beautiful. Now it just made her feel small, insignificant. A tiny person making a tiny decision in a landscape that could swallow her whole. Lucas Reed drove in silence. When Evelyn tried conversation, he responded in monosyllables. "Have you known Mr. Webb long?" "Long enough. Is he well regarded in the community?" "He is rich. That is regarded well enough out here." His voice was flat, unreadable. But something in his tone made Evelyn's skin prickle. She noticed they were not heading directly west. The stars told her that much. They were going northwest, taking what seemed like a longer route. When she mentioned this, Lucas's jaw tightened. "Roads are better this way. Less mud." She did not believe him. But she was too cold and too tired to argue. The temperature dropped as they rode. Evelyn's fingers went numb despite her gloves. Her breath came in white plumes that hung in the still air. She thought about Marcus Webb's letter, the promise of comfort and security, the offer of return fare if she found the situation intolerable. Had he sent this cold, silent man to fetch her as some kind of test? After what felt like hours, Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop. "My place. You will freeze if we keep going tonight." Evelyn looked around. A modest house sat in a shallow valley, a creek glinting silver nearby. Barn, corral, outbuildings, everything neat and functional, and lonely. The house looked desperately lonely. Lucas helped her down from the wagon. His hands were steady, impersonal. "Take my room. I will sleep in the barn." Inside, the house was simple but well built. Stone fireplace, cast iron stove, long wooden table, a few chairs. Clean, but sparse. The home of a man who lived alone and kept things practical. On the mantel, a photograph caught Evelyn's eye. A woman, young, pretty, dark-haired, smiling at the camera with the kind of unguarded joy that spoke of love and safety and a future full of promise. "Your wife." Lucas froze. His back was to her, but she saw his shoulders stiffen. "Sarah. She died 3 years ago." The grief in his voice was raw, immediate, as if it had happened yesterday. "I am sorry, so am I." He built up the fire without another word, then showed her to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The bed was narrow but clean. A quilt lay folded at the foot. "There is water in the pitcher. Privy is out back. I will wake you at first light. Mr. Reed." He paused in the doorway. "Thank you for coming to get me, for your hospitality." Something flickered in his eyes, gone before she could identify it. "Do not thank me yet, Miss Hart." Then he was gone. Evelyn lay awake for a long time, listening to unfamiliar sounds. The wind against the house, the creak of settling wood. Somewhere outside, a coyote called. She was 2,000 miles from home, in a house with a stranger, on land that went on forever. And tomorrow, she would meet the man she had agreed to marry. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt a growing sense of dread that she could not explain. Late in the night, voices woke her. Evelyn moved to the window, careful to stay in shadow. Lucas stood outside, talking to another man. One of his ranch hands, she assumed. Their voices were low, but the night was quiet enough to carry fragments. "She does not know anything. You sure about that? Look at her. Boston society girl. She has no idea what she is walking into. Then why did you bring her here? Why not take her straight to Webb?" A long pause. "Because I could not let another one go to that place without at least trying." "Another one? What does that mean?" "It means I have buried enough women because of Marcus Webb." The conversation ended. Footsteps receded. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Another one. Buried enough women. What did Lucas Reed know about Marcus Webb? And why had he not told her? Morning came gray and cold. Evelyn found Lucas in the kitchen, making coffee and biscuits. He moved with the efficiency of a man long accustomed to caring for himself. "Sleep well?" "Well enough." They ate in uncomfortable silence. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. Tall, weathered, strong. Lines around his eyes that suggested pain, not laughter. A man carrying something heavy. He reminded her of the men who had come back from the war when she was a child. Men who had seen things they could not unsee, done things they could not undo. "Mr. Reed," she said finally, "last night I heard you talking with someone." He went still. "You said something about burying women because of Marcus Webb." The silence stretched between them. "You misheard." "I did not." "Then you should forget what you heard." "Why?" "Because knowing too much about Marcus Webb is a dangerous thing, Miss Hart. And you are already in more danger than you understand." Before she could respond, he stood and carried his plate to the basin. "We leave in 10 minutes. Get your things." The ride to Webb's ranch took 2 hours. The landscape opened up around them. Vast rolling plains, distant mountains, enormous sky. Lucas pointed out landmarks as they went, but his voice was distant, distracted. "That is Widow's Peak. Creek runs through that valley. Good water year-round." Evelyn barely heard him. Her mind kept circling back to his words. "More danger than you understand." What kind of danger? From Marcus Webb, the man whose letters had been so courteous, so civilized. As they crested a ridge, Lucas pulled the horses to a stop. There. Evelyn looked where he pointed. A grand house, almost a mansion, surrounded by outbuildings, far larger and more prosperous than Lucas's modest spread. It looked like something from a picture book. White painted wood, wrap-around porch, crystal windows that caught the morning light. Beautiful. Perfect. Too perfect. "That is Webb's place?" "That is it." Lucas's voice was flat. His jaw was tight. He owns 3,000 acres, biggest spread in the valley. Cattle, horses, land. Everything a man could want. Evelyn heard what he did not say, and some things a man should not have. They descended into the valley. As they approached the house, a man emerged from the front door. Tall, handsome, impeccably dressed in a way that seemed wrong for a cattle ranch. His smile was warm. His eyes were watchful. "Miss Hart?" At last. He came down the porch steps with the ease of a man accustomed to being in command. "I'm so sorry I could not meet you myself. We had trouble with wolves in the north pasture. Forgive me." He took her hand, bowed over it like a gentleman. Evelyn felt relief wash over her. He was charming, educated, everything his letters had promised. But something nagged at her. Something about the way Lucas Reed had gone rigid beside her. "Thank you for fetching her, neighbor," Marcus said, shaking Lucas's hand. "I owe you. No debt between neighbors." Lucas's voice was carefully neutral. His eyes were not. They held something that made Evelyn's stomach clench. Warning. That was it. Lucas Reed was trying to warn her. But of what? "Well," Marcus said, his arm sliding around Evelyn's waist with easy familiarity. "Let me show you your new home." He guided her toward the house. Evelyn glanced back. Lucas stood by his wagon watching her. His face was unreadable. At the last moment, his eyes met hers. Something passed between them, something she could not name. Then Marcus led her through the front door, and Lucas Reed was gone. Evelyn watched from the parlor window as Lucas's wagon disappeared down the road. She felt inexplicably like she was watching her last chance at escape right away. The house was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, fine carpets that must have cost a fortune to transport this far from civilization. Marcus gave her a tour, charming and attentive. The parlor, the dining room, the library stocked with books that showed signs of actually being read. "My late mother was a great reader," Marcus explained. "I inherited her collection." "You were close to her?" "Very. She died when I was young. Father followed not long after. I made my own way after that." His voice carried just the right note of old sorrow, bravely borne. Evelyn found herself warming to him. He had overcome hardship, built something from nothing. Perhaps his letters had been honest after all. Perhaps Lucas Reed was simply a bitter man looking for someone to blame for his own losses. Her room was beautiful. 4-poster bed, vanity with silver-backed brushes, window overlooking the valley. "I hope you will be comfortable here," Marcus said from the doorway. "I want you to think of this as your home. You are very kind." Not kind. Practical. He smiled. "A wife should be comfortable. Happy wives make happy homes." Something about the way he said it made Evelyn pause. But before she could examine the feeling, he was speaking again. "Dinner is at 7. Mrs. Foster will help you dress." "And Miss Hart?" "Yes? I am glad you are here. Truly glad." He closed the door behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the beautiful room, surrounded by luxury she had not seen since before her father's death. She should have felt safe. Instead, she felt like a bird that had just realized the gilded cage had no door. The first week at Marcus Webb's ranch passed in a blur of comfort and unease. Evelyn had not been this warm, this well-fed, this physically comfortable since before her father's death. Perhaps longer. Mrs. Foster, the housekeeper, attended to her every need. Hot water for bathing, fresh flowers in her room, meals that would not have been out of place in a Boston restaurant. And Marcus himself was the perfect gentleman. He asked about her interests, discussed books from his library, listened with apparent fascination as she described her life in Boston, carefully edited to remove the worst of the desperation. He never touched her inappropriately, never spoke a crude word, never raised his voice. So why did Evelyn feel like something was terribly wrong? The signs were small at first. Mrs. Foster watched her with an expression that looked like pity. When Evelyn tried to engage her in conversation, the older woman's eyes slid away. "Is there something you want to tell me?" "No, miss. Nothing at all." But her hands trembled as she said it. Then there was the matter of the third floor. Marcus had given her a tour of the entire house, the parlor, dining room, library, kitchen, her bedroom, the guest rooms. But when Evelyn asked about the stairs that continued upward, Marcus had smiled and shaken his head. "Storage. Dusty and dangerous. The floorboards are rotting up there. I have been meaning to have them repaired, but there is always something more pressing." She accepted the explanation. Why would he lie about something so trivial? But she noticed that Mrs. Foster glanced toward those stairs with something that looked like fear. 3 days after her arrival, Evelyn was allowed to ride. Supervised, of course, within sight of the house. One of the ranch hands always watching from a distance. "For your safety," Marcus explained. "There are wolves, mountain lions. You do not know this country yet." It made sense. Everything Marcus said made sense. But it felt like a prison nonetheless. On her 4th day of riding, Evelyn encountered another woman. She had ventured to the edge of Marcus's property, where a fence line marked the boundary with a neighboring ranch. A woman her mother's age sat on horseback on the other side. Weathered face, kind eyes, a smile that seemed genuine. "You must be the new bride. I am Martha Crawford. Our ranch is 3 miles north." Evelyn found herself unexpectedly grateful for female company. They talked for nearly an hour. Martha was warm, welcoming, hungry for conversation in this isolated land. But when Evelyn mentioned Lucas Reed, Martha's expression shifted. "Lucas is a good man, troubled but good. He has had more than his share of grief." "His wife?" Martha hesitated. Her eyes flickered toward Webb's ranch, then away. Sarah was special. Her death hit him hard, hit all of us hard. How did she die? Long pause. Too long. "You should not ask questions like that around here, dear. Not about the past, not about the Webbs." Before Evelyn could press further, Martha made excuses and rode away. The Webbs. Plural. What did that mean? That evening, Marcus proposed marriage. They were sitting in the parlor after dinner, fire crackling, wine in crystal glasses, everything civilized and proper. "Miss Hart, Evelyn. I believe we have come to know each other well these past days. We have corresponded for months," she agreed. "And these days have been very pleasant. Then let us not delay. We are both practical people. We know what we want." He took her hand. "Marry me. This Saturday." "Saturday? That is only 3 days away." "Why wait? I feel I know you already." "And I confess," he smiled, "I am not a patient man when I see something I want." Evelyn's heart raced. This was what she had come for: security, a home, a future. But something made her hesitate. "Is there a reason for the rush?" "Only that I am eager to begin our life together." He squeezed her hand. "Unless you have doubts." Did she? She was not sure. Everything seemed perfect, perhaps too perfect. "No," she heard herself say. "No doubts. Then Saturday it is. I will send word to Reverend Whitmore." He raised his glass. "To us." "To us?" Evelyn echoed. But as she drank, she noticed Mrs. Foster standing in the doorway. The housekeeper's face was white as chalk. That night, Evelyn could not sleep. She lay in her beautiful bed in her beautiful room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand the unease that would not leave her. Everything was fine. Marcus was kind. The house was comfortable. She would be married in 3 days. So why did she feel like screaming? Around midnight, she heard something. Footsteps. Above her. On the forbidden 3rd floor. She sat up, listening. The footsteps moved slowly, deliberately, then stopped. Then a sound that made her blood freeze. A woman's sob. Quickly muffled. Evelyn's heart pounded. A woman was crying on the 3rd floor. The floor, Marcus said, was empty except for rotting storage. She should have stayed in bed. Should have told herself it was her imagination. Should have been the good, obedient, grateful bride to be. But she thought about her mother's death. About the night she had been too afraid to act. About the promise she had made to herself. Never again. She slipped out of bed, lit a candle, and crept into the hallway. The house was silent except for those muffled sobs drifting down from above. Evelyn climbed the stairs to the second floor, then found the narrow stairs that continued upward. The third-floor landing was dark, dusty, just as Marcus had described. But the dust was disturbed. Footprints led to a door at the end of the hall. She tried the handle. Locked. From inside, another sob. A voice, barely audible. "Please, please." Evelyn's candle trembled in her hand. "Hello?" she whispered. "Is someone there?" A sharp intake of breath from behind the door, then silence. Evelyn pressed her ear to the wood. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. "I just want to help." For a long moment, nothing. Then a whisper so faint she almost missed it. "Run. You have to run." "What do you mean? Who are you?" Before the voice could answer, a hand closed on Evelyn's shoulder. She spun, her candle nearly going out. Marcus stood behind her. His face was calm. His eyes were not. "What are you doing up here, darling?" I heard. "I thought I heard." "The cat. I keep a barn cat locked up here. She got into the rat poison once. Nearly died. Vet says she is half mad now. Cries like a woman sometimes." His grip on her shoulder tightened. "Not painful, but firm. A warning. There are parts of this house that are not safe, Evelyn. I told you that. I need you to trust me. I do trust you. Do you?" His eyes searched her face, looking for something. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. "Then go back to bed. We will discuss this in the morning." He released her. Evelyn walked back to her room on shaking legs. She did not look back, but she knew he was watching her until she closed her door. In her room, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, heart pounding. A cat. He said it was a cat. But cats did not say please. Cats did not tell you to run. There was a woman locked on the third floor. She was sure of it. The question was who? And what had Marcus Webb done to put her there? Sleep did not come that night. Evelyn lay awake, turning over possibilities. Perhaps she had imagined it. Perhaps the woman was a servant. Perhaps there was an explanation. But she kept hearing that whispered warning. Run. You have to run. In the morning, Marcus was his usual charming self. "I apologize for startling you last night," he said over breakfast. "I should have warned you about that cat. The sounds she makes are truly unsettling." "I understand. I knew you would." He smiled. "You are a sensible woman, Evelyn. One of the things I admire most about you." He reached across the table and took her hand. "3 more days, then you will be my wife. And all this awkwardness will be behind us." His thumb traced circles on her palm. It should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like a promise. Or a threat. Later that morning, Marcus called her to his study. "I want to show you something," he said. "To put your mind at ease." He led her up the stairs to the third floor. Evelyn's heart hammered as they climbed. What was he going to show her? The woman she had heard? A body? Instead, he unlocked a door and revealed a small room containing a cat. A gray tabby, thin and wild-eyed, pacing in a wire cage. As they watched, it opened its mouth and let out a wail that sounded almost human. "See?" Marcus said gently. Poor creature. The poison damaged her brain. She makes the most disturbing sounds. Evelyn stared at the cat. It did look half mad. Its wail did sound almost like a woman crying, but she had heard words. Please, run. Had she imagined that part? "I should have shown you sooner," Marcus continued. "Forgive me for being secretive. I was embarrassed, truthfully. A man my age keeping a mad cat." He smiled, self-deprecating, charming. Evelyn made herself smile back. There's nothing to forgive. But as they walked back downstairs, she noticed something. The room with the cat was the second door on the third floor. The footsteps she had heard last night had come from the end of the hall. from the third door. Marcus had not shown her what was behind the third door. 2 days until the wedding. Evelyn moved through them in a daze of preparation. Dress fittings, menu planning, guest lists. Small, Marcus insisted. We are private people. She wrote a letter to a distant cousin in Boston, a brief note letting someone know where she was. Marcus offered to mail it for her. I will take it to town this afternoon, he said. Save you the trouble. She thanked him. 3 days later, the letter would be found in Marcus's desk drawer, unopened, unsent. But Evelyn did not know that yet. What she did know was that something was very wrong in this beautiful house, and she had 2 days to figure out what. The night before the wedding, Lucas Reed came back. Evelyn was in the garden, ostensibly admiring the late autumn roses. In reality, she was searching for something. She did not know what. Evidence, perhaps, or reassurance. Instead, she found a handkerchief. Fine linen, caught in a rose bush, embroidered with the letter C. She was examining it when hoofbeats approached. Lucas Reed rode up to the garden fence. His face was grim. Miss Hart, I need to speak with you. Mr. Reed, I am not sure. Now, while Webb is in town. Evelyn glanced toward the house. Mrs. Foster was watching from a window. I do not think that is appropriate. Lucas swung down from his horse and approached the fence. What I have to tell you is not appropriate. But you need to hear it anyway. Then tell me. He looked around, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. Marcus Webb is dangerous. You need to leave this place. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. That is a serious accusation. It is the truth. Based on what? Lucas's jaw tightened. 3 years ago, my wife died. Her name was Sarah. She was investigating the disappearance of her sister, Clara. Disappearance? Clara was Marcus Webb's first wife. Evelyn's heart stopped. First wife. She died 4 years ago. A riding accident, they said. Body was swept away in a river. Never found. That is tragic, but... Sarah did not believe it. Clara was an experienced rider. The river was shallow that time of year. None of it made sense. What are you saying? I am saying my wife started asking questions. 6 months later, she was dead too. Another riding accident, a fall from a horse that had never thrown anyone. Mr. Reed. I found evidence that her saddle had been tampered with. By the time I brought it to the sheriff, the saddle had disappeared. Evelyn looked at the handkerchief in her hand. The letter C. Clara? What? She held up the handkerchief. Lucas went pale. Where did you find that? In the garden, caught in a rose bush. His voice dropped to a whisper. That is Clara's handkerchief. I would know her embroidery anywhere. She made one just like it for Sarah. But Clara has been dead for 4 years. Has she? Lucas's eyes met hers. Or has she been locked in that house, waiting for someone to find her? The pieces fell into place. The 3rd floor, the crying, the woman's voice telling her to run. I heard something, Evelyn said slowly. Last night, a woman crying. Marcus said it was a cat. And you believed him? I do not know what I believed, but I heard words. She told me to run. Lucas gripped the fence so hard his knuckles went white. Then Clara is alive. She has been in that house for 4 years while I did nothing. You did not know. I suspected. I should have acted. Hoofbeats in the distance. Someone was coming. Lucas pulled back. I have to go. Webb cannot know I spoke to you. What am I supposed to do? Find out if Clara is really up there. And if she is, get word to me. My ranch is 5 miles east. Come at night if you have to, and then what? And then we get you both out of there, before you become the next woman to disappear. He swung onto his horse. Be careful, Miss Hart. Marcus Webb has killed before. He will kill again. Then he was gone, riding hard toward the east. Evelyn stood alone in the garden, the handkerchief clutched in her hand. Tomorrow, she was supposed to marry Marcus Webb. A man who might have murdered his first wife. A man who might have murdered Lucas Reed's wife. A man who might be keeping a woman prisoner in his own house. And if she went through with the wedding, she might be next. The sun was setting over the mountains. The light was fading, and Evelyn Hart had a decision to make. That night, Evelyn waited until the house was silent. Midnight came and went. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 1, then 2. She had spent the evening playing the perfect bride-to-be, smiling at Marcus across the dinner table, discussing wedding details, pretending that nothing was wrong. It was the hardest performance of her life. Now she lay in bed, fully dressed under the covers, listening to the house settle around her. Marcus's bedroom was on the second floor at the opposite end of the hall from hers. She had learned his patterns over the past week. By midnight, his breathing was deep and steady. He slept like a man with no conscience, or a man with no conscience to trouble him. At 2:30, Evelyn slipped out of bed. She took no candle. The moonlight through her window was enough to see by, and she could not risk being spotted. Her first stop was Marcus's study. The door was unlocked. He did not expect her to snoop, did not believe her capable of it. His arrogance might be her salvation. She moved through the room by feel, hands brushing over furniture until she found his desk. The drawers were locked. But Evelyn Hart had learned to pick locks years ago. Her father had been careless with keys, always losing them, always calling for Evelyn to find them. Eventually, she had learned to open his desk herself. It was a skill she had never expected to use like this. She worked by moonlight, her hairpin probing the simple lock. Within minutes, she heard the click. The drawer slid open. Inside, she found papers, contracts, letters, and a small wooden box. She lifted the lid. 3 wedding rings lay on velvet, different sizes, different styles. 3 rings. Evelyn's hands shook as she lifted one. It was a simple gold band, worn thin with age. Inside, barely visible in the moonlight, she could make out engraved initials, M.W. and C.D. Clara. She set the ring down and picked up another. This one was newer, more ornate. M.W. and M.P., another woman, another wife. The third ring was simple and elegant. M.W. and E.H., her own initials. Marcus Webb had already had a ring made for her, a ring to add to his collection. Evelyn felt bile rise in her throat. She dug deeper into the box, found a locket with a woman's portrait, bundled letters tied with ribbon. One bundle caught her eye. The handwriting was familiar. She pulled it free and moved to the window where the moonlight was strongest. Her father's handwriting. Her father had written to Marcus Webb. She read the letters with growing horror. The first few were friendly, business discussions, land investment in Montana, partnership opportunities. Then the tone changed. Webb, I have concerns about our arrangement. The returns you promised have not materialized. Then more desperate. I demand an accounting. Where has my money gone? Then threatening. I know what you are. I know about the women. I know about the land fraud. I know everything. If you do not release me from this partnership, I will go to the authorities. The final letter was dated 1 week before her father's death. Evelyn read it 3 times, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. Marcus Webb had not just swindled her father, he had killed him. And then he had placed a matrimonial advertisement, knowing exactly who would answer, knowing that the desperate daughter would come running into his trap. She was not a random victim. She was revenge. Evelyn put the letters back exactly as she had found them, closed the box, relocked the drawer. Then she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. She had to find Clara, had to know for certain. The hallway was dark, silent. She moved to the 3rd door, the one Marcus had not shown her, locked as before. But this time, she had Marcus's keys. She had taken them from his coat pocket before dinner, copying them quickly in wax, then returning them before he noticed. The copy was rough, but it worked. The lock clicked open. Evelyn pushed the door inward. The room was small, windowless, lit only by the hallway moonlight spilling through the open door. A narrow bed against one wall, a chamber pot in the corner. And huddled on the bed, a figure so thin and pale she looked like a ghost. The woman raised her head. Her eyes were enormous in her wasted face. Her hair was matted. Her skin was sallow. But she was alive. "Please," the woman whispered. "Please do not tell him you saw me." Evelyn stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Clara? Clara Webb?" The woman flinched at the name. "How do you know who I am?" "Your sister, Sarah. Her husband, Lucas." "Sarah?" Clara's voice cracked. "Sarah is alive?" Evelyn's heart broke. "No, I'm sorry. She died 3 years ago." Clara's face crumpled. She had been locked in this room for 4 years, not knowing her sister was dead, hoping for rescue that would never come. Evelyn crossed to the bed and sat beside her. "I am going to get you out of here. I promise you cannot. He watches everything. The servants are terrified of him. There is no escape. There has to be." Clara gripped her arm with surprising strength. "There was another woman. Before me. Margaret. I found her things when I first came here. Marcus said she was a former housekeeper." "What happened to her?" Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "There is a tunnel under the root cellar. Marcus built it for tornado shelter. But I have heard sounds from there. And once, when he thought I was asleep, he carried something down there. Something wrapped in canvas." Evelyn felt ice in her veins. "Margaret? I do not know. I only know no one who goes into that tunnel comes out. How long have you been here?" "4 years. Since I found out about his other wife." "Other wife?" "Marcus was married in Texas. Bigamy. When I confronted him, he locked me up here. He faked my death. Riding accident, body swept away. No one looked too hard." Clara's grip tightened. "He is going to do the same thing to you. Marry you. Take your property. Then make you disappear." Evelyn thought about her father's land claims. Worth something, Marcus had said in his letters. Enough to kill for? Apparently so. "I have to go," Evelyn said, "before he wakes up. But I will come back. I will get help." "There is no help. He owns everyone in this valley." "Not everyone." "Lucas Reed." Clara's eyes widened. "Lucas is still here?" "He has not given up. He's been trying to prove what Marcus did to Sarah. He will help us." But Clara was shaking her head. "Lucas is not a fighter. He is a rancher. A good man, but soft. Marcus will kill him. Then we will have to be smarter than Marcus." Evelyn stood. "I will come back tomorrow night. Bring food, water, and a plan." She paused at the door. "One more thing. Lucas said he found evidence about Sarah's saddle, that it was tampered with." Clara nodded slowly. "Marcus bragged about it. Once, when he was drunk. He said she should have minded her own business." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. "He is going to pay for what he has done. All of it." She slipped out of the room, locked the door behind her, and crept back downstairs. The house was still silent. Marcus was still asleep. But Evelyn Hart was wide awake, and she was done being a victim. The next morning, Evelyn played her part. She smiled at Marcus over breakfast, discussed the wedding, let him kiss her hand. Inside, she was screaming. But she had learned something about herself in that third-floor room. She was stronger than she had ever known. Stronger than her fear. Stronger than her desperation. Strong enough to destroy Marcus Webb. She just had to survive long enough to do it. The wedding was scheduled for noon. That gave her 6 hours. 6 hours to get word to Lucas Reed. 6 hours to find evidence the sheriff would believe. 6 hours to save Clara and herself. It was not enough time, but it was all she had. Her first chance came mid-morning. Marcus rode out to check on cattle in the north pasture, the first time he had left the ranch since her arrival. "Take good care of my bride," he told Mrs. Foster. "I will be back by 11. Evelyn waited until he was out of sight. Then she went to the kitchen. Mrs. Foster was peeling potatoes, her back to the door. She did not hear Evelyn approach. "You know what he is?" The housekeeper spun around. The knife in her hand trembled. Miss Hart. I do not know what you mean. Yes, you do. You know about Clara, about the other women, about everything. Mrs. Foster's face went gray. I cannot. If he finds out I talked, he is going to kill me. Do you understand that? After the wedding, I will disappear just like the others. The housekeeper began to cry. There is nothing I can do. He owns me. He owns everyone. Then help me escape. Please, before it is too late. A long, terrible silence. Then Mrs. Foster whispered, There is a tunnel under the root cellar. It comes out on the other side of the creek. I know about the tunnel. Clara told me. Clara is still alive? Yes. And I am going to get her out. But I need help. Mrs. Foster wiped her eyes. What do you need? A distraction. Something to keep Marcus occupied this afternoon. And the key to the root cellar, he keeps it on his ring. Then I need you to steal it. The housekeeper stared at her. If he catches me, if we do nothing, we are dead anyway, all of us. A long moment passed. Then Mrs. Foster nodded. I will get the key. Be ready to move when I give the signal. Evelyn returned to her room to wait. The hours crawled past. She changed into the wedding dress Marcus had provided. White silk, beautiful and expensive. The dress of a bride or a shroud. At 11, Marcus returned from the pasture. He came to her room smiling. You look beautiful. I am a lucky man. Evelyn made herself smile back. I hope I can make you happy. Oh, you will. He kissed her forehead. You will make me very happy indeed. He left to change for the ceremony. Evelyn sat by the window watching the clock. 11:30, 11:45. At 11:50, Mrs. Foster appeared at her door. The key is in the kitchen. Under the flour tin. I told Marcus I saw smoke coming from the east barn. He went to investigate. How long do I have? 10 minutes, maybe less. Evelyn gathered her skirts and ran. Through the hallway, down the stairs, into the kitchen. She found the key exactly where Mrs. Foster had said. Then she heard hoofbeats approaching. Marcus was coming back. She had seconds. She should have gone for Clara first. Should have freed her and run. But she was not thinking about escape anymore. She was thinking about evidence. Evidence that would put Marcus Webb in prison for the rest of his life. She ran for the root cellar. The stairs were steep and dark. The smell hit her immediately. Earth and rot. Death. Old death. She struck a match and found a lantern. In its flickering light, she saw the tunnel entrance. A low opening in the earthen wall, black as pitch. She had to know what was inside. She crawled into the tunnel. The walls pressed close. The smell grew stronger. Her hands touched something that crunched. Bones. She lifted the lantern. A skeleton lay against the tunnel wall, dressed in rotting cloth. A glint of gold on one finger. A wedding ring. Margaret. Evelyn had found Marcus Webb's first victim. She heard footsteps above, the root cellar door opening. Evelyn? Marcus's voice. Pleasant. Calm. Deadly. I know you are down here, darling. Mrs. Foster told me everything. Evelyn pressed herself against the tunnel wall, trying to make herself invisible. There is no point in hiding. The tunnel only goes one way. She heard him descending the stairs. I have to admit, I'm impressed. I thought you were just another desperate woman. But you have teeth. His footsteps stopped. Unfortunately, so do I. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought about her mother's knife still sewn into her petticoat. 3 inches of steel. Not much against a man like Marcus Webb, but it was all she had. Come out, Evelyn, let us talk like civilized people. She did not move. Fine. Have it your way. She heard him moving closer, saw the beam of his lantern sweeping toward the tunnel entrance. This was it. She was going to die in this tunnel next to Margaret's bones, unless she fought. Evelyn pulled the knife from her petticoat and waited. Lucas Reed had been watching Webb's ranch since dawn. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. Miss Hart had not appeared at the usual times. No walk in the garden. No ride along the fence line. The house was quiet in a way that made his skin crawl. He should have acted sooner. Should have gone to the sheriff. Should have done something besides watch and wait. But that was what he had been doing for 3 years. Watching, waiting, letting Marcus Webb get away with murder because Lucas Reed was too afraid to act. Not anymore. At noon, he saw smoke rising from the east barn. A distraction? Or a real emergency? Either way, it was his chance. He rode hard for the house. The front door was unlocked. The parlor was empty. The kitchen showed signs of hasty activity. He found Mrs. Foster huddled in the pantry weeping. "Where is Miss Hart?" "The cellar." She went to the cellar. He followed her down. Lucas ran. The cellar stairs were steep and dark. He drew his pistol as he descended. At the bottom he heard voices. Marcus, somewhere ahead. "Come out, Evelyn. Let us talk like civilized people." Then silence. Then the sound of a struggle. Lucas charged toward the sound, his lantern swinging wildly. He found them at the tunnel entrance. Marcus had Evelyn by the throat. Her white wedding dress was torn and dirty. She was clawing at his hands, gasping for air. And embedded in Marcus's forearm was a small knife with a pearl handle. "Let her go," Lucas said. Marcus turned. His face was twisted with rage and pain. "Reed, I should have known. Let her go. Now. Or what? You will shoot me? You do not have the nerve. You never did." Lucas cocked his pistol. "Try me." A long moment passed. Then Marcus released Evelyn. She fell to the ground, coughing and gasping. "This is not over," Marcus said. "She is mine. Legally. She has not married you yet. Details." Marcus smiled despite the knife in his arm. "The law is on my side, Reed. It always has been." Lucas helped Evelyn to her feet. Not this time. From above, they heard new voices. Boots on the cellar stairs. Sheriff Brennan descended with 2 deputies. "What in the name of God is going on here?" Marcus's smile widened. "Sheriff, thank goodness. This man broke into my home and attacked me. I demand he be arrested." Lucas felt his heart sink. Even now, Marcus was going to talk his way out of it. But Evelyn stepped forward. "Sheriff, there is a body in that tunnel." "What?" "A woman's body. A skeleton. Marcus Webb killed her. He killed his first wife, Margaret. He has been keeping his second wife, Clara, imprisoned on the 3rd floor for 4 years." Silence. Sheriff Brennan looked at Marcus. "Is this true?" "Of course not. The woman is hysterical. She must have hit her head." "Then you will not mind if we look in the tunnel." Marcus's smile faltered. "I do not consent to a search. I am not asking for your consent." Brennan pushed past Marcus into the tunnel. A moment later, they heard him curse. "Good God! There is a body in here." Marcus moved fast. He grabbed a lantern and swung it at Lucas's head. Lucas ducked, but the distraction was enough. Marcus ran. He made it up the stairs before anyone could stop him. They heard his boots pounding through the house above. "Jim! Caleb!" Lucas shouted as he gave chase. "Do not let him reach the horses." But Marcus was not heading for the stable. He was heading for the 3rd floor. For Clara. Lucas caught up to him on the stairs. They fought on the narrow steps, grappling and punching. Marcus was stronger, but Lucas was desperate. 3 years of guilt drove his fists. 3 years of watching Sarah's grave. 3 years of knowing Clara was somewhere, suffering. 3 years of cowardice that ended now. He knocked Marcus down the stairs. The fall should have finished him. But Marcus was up again in seconds, a derringer appearing in his hand. "You should have stayed out of this, Reed." The gun fired. The bullet hit Lucas in the shoulder. He went down hard. Marcus stood over him, smiling. "I am going to kill you. Then I'm going to get Clara. Then I'm going to disappear. By the time anyone figures out what happened, I will be in Mexico." He aimed the derringer at Lucas's head. "You first." The shot never came. Evelyn had followed them up the stairs. Now she stood behind Marcus, holding his own rifle. "Drop it," she said. Marcus laughed. "You do not know how to use that. I know you killed my father." Marcus went still. I found your letters. I know about the partnership, the fraud, the threats. I know he was going to expose you, and you poisoned him. That is ridiculous. Is it? Evelyn's voice was steady. Drop the gun, Mr. Webb, or I will shoot you where you stand. You will not try me. A long moment passed. Then Marcus dropped the derringer. Sheriff Brennan appeared on the stairs, deputies behind him. Marcus Webb, you are under arrest for murder. This is not over, Marcus said as they put him in irons. The law cannot hold me. I have friends, money, power. Evelyn watched them drag him away. The law might not hold you, she said quietly, but justice will. They found Clara on the third floor. She was barely conscious. 4 years of imprisonment had left her weak, disoriented. But when she saw Lucas, she began to cry. You came, she whispered. I prayed every day, and you came. I should have come sooner, Lucas said, his voice breaking. I am sorry, Clara. I am so sorry. They carried her out of the house into the sunlight. The first sunlight she had seen in 4 years. That evening they buried Margaret properly. Her bones were laid to rest in the Stillwater Cemetery, with a headstone that bore her name. Margaret Patterson, died 1882. May she finally rest in peace. Evelyn stood at the graveside, still wearing the torn wedding dress. She was supposed to marry a monster today. Instead, she had helped bring him down. Lucas appeared beside her, his arm in a sling. How are you? I do not know. Evelyn looked at the fresh grave. I thought I came here to escape my past. Instead, I walked straight into something worse. You did not just walk into it, you fought your way out. We fought our way out. Lucas was quiet for a moment. When I met you at the station that night, I saw another victim. Another woman Marcus was going to destroy. I almost did not warn you. I almost let it happen. Why did you warn me? Because I was tired of being afraid, tired of letting him win. He took my wife. I was not going to let him take you, too. Evelyn looked at him. This man who had come for her when no one else would, who had risked everything to save a woman he barely knew. Thank you, she said. Do not thank me. I should have acted years ago. You acted when it mattered. That is what counts. The sun was setting over the mountains. The light was fading. And for the first time since her father's death, Evelyn Hart felt something that was not fear. It was hope. The trial of Marcus Webb began 3 weeks later in Helena. It was the sensation of the territory. Newspapers from Denver to San Francisco sent reporters. The courtroom was packed every day. Marcus Webb, once the most respected rancher in Stillwater Valley, now stood accused of 3 counts of murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and multiple counts of fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Margaret's bones recovered from the tunnel. Clara's testimony about her 4 years of imprisonment. Mrs. Foster's account of what she had witnessed. The letters proving Marcus had swindled and murdered James Hart. And Evelyn's testimony. She took the stand on the 3rd day of the trial. The defense attorney, a slick lawyer from back east, tried to discredit her. Is it not true, Miss Hart, that you came to Montana specifically to marry Mr. Webb? Yes. And you accepted his proposal willingly? I accepted a proposal from a man who presented himself as honest and respectable. I did not accept a proposal from a murderer. The lawyer smiled. And yet you would have married him, ignorant of his crimes, had Mr. Reed not intervened. How can the court trust your judgment? Evelyn met his eyes. My judgment led me into a trap. But my judgment also led me to fight my way out of it. I make no apologies for being deceived by a practiced liar. I only regret that I did not recognize the truth sooner. You stabbed Mr. Webb during the confrontation in the cellar. I defended myself against a man who was trying to kill me. Some might say you were the aggressor. Some might say a woman has the right to fight for her life. The courtroom murmured in approval. Evelyn was not finished. Mr. Webb killed his first wife, Margaret. He imprisoned his second wife, Clara, for 4 years. He murdered my father when my father threatened to expose him. And he brought me to Montana to continue his pattern of violence. She looked directly at Marcus. I am not a victim. I am a survivor, and I will see justice done. Marcus Webb was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was death by hanging, to be carried out at the territorial prison in Deer Lodge. As the deputies led him from the courtroom, Marcus caught Evelyn's eye. "This is not over," he said. "You think you have won, but women like you do not win. You just survive until someone stronger comes along." Evelyn stood. "You are wrong. Women like me do win. We just take longer to realize we are fighting." She turned and walked out of the courtroom, head high. She never looked back. After the trial, Evelyn stayed in Montana. There was nothing for her in Boston. The house was sold. Her father's debts were paid. The life she had known was gone forever. But something new was beginning. She stayed at Lucas Reed's ranch while she figured out what to do next. Separate rooms, proper and respectable. But they spent every evening talking, learning each other. She told him about Boston, her mother's death, the guilt she had carried for years. "I froze that night," she said. "My mother was dying and I was too afraid to act. By the time I finally did something, it was too late. You were young, old enough to know better." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I know something about being too afraid to act. I spent 3 years letting Marcus Webb destroy people because I was afraid of what he might do to me. You stopped him in the end. So did you." They looked at each other in the firelight. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had expected. One evening, Lucas told her about Sarah. "She was the love of my life," he said. "When she died, I thought that part of me died with her. I did not think I could ever feel anything again, and now I think maybe it was just sleeping, waiting for a reason to wake up." Evelyn watched him, this hard-weathered man who carried so much grief, who had found the courage to fight when it mattered most. "What reason?" she asked softly. He looked at her. "You." Clara recovered slowly. She stayed with the Crawfords, regaining her strength. The 4 years of imprisonment had damaged her, but not destroyed her. One afternoon, Evelyn rode over to visit. They sat on the Crawfords' porch, watching the spring sun melt the last of the snow. "I never thanked you properly," Clara said. "You saved my life. You saved mine. If you had not warned me that first night, I might not have been suspicious enough to investigate." Clara smiled. "We saved each other then." They sat in comfortable silence. "What will you do now?" Evelyn asked. "Go back to Ohio. My family is there. I need to heal, to find out who I am when I'm not a prisoner." "Will you miss Montana?" Clara considered. "I will miss the sky. It is bigger here than anywhere else. But I will not miss the memories." "I understand." Clara looked at her. "What about you? Will you stay?" Evelyn thought about it. "I do not know. I came here expecting to find security. Instead, I found danger. But I also found something else." "Lucas Reed?" Evelyn smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "It is when you look at him, and when he looks at you." Clara took her hand. "He is a good man, Evelyn. Do not let fear keep you from happiness." "I have had enough of fear. Then what are you waiting for?" Spring came to Montana like an explosion. The snow melted, the grass turned green. Wildflowers bloomed across the valley, and Evelyn Hart found herself falling in love. It was not dramatic, not the lightning bolt of romantic novels. It was slow and steady, built on shared work and quiet conversations, on watching Lucas care for his ranch, his cattle, his men, on seeing the way he treated everyone with fairness and respect, on learning that his quiet strength had been there all along, waiting for a reason to emerge. One evening, they stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. "You could go back to Boston," Lucas said. "Your father's land claims are yours now. They are worth enough to start over." "I could? Is that what you want?" Evelyn looked at the valley. The ranch buildings small in the distance, the mountains rising beyond. "What do you want, Lucas?" "I want you to be happy, whatever that means. That is not an answer." "Fine." He turned to face her. "I want you to stay." I want you to marry me. Not because you are desperate or because you have no choice, but because you choose it. Choose me. Why? Because you are the bravest person I have ever met. Because you stabbed a man to save my life. Because when I look at you, I do not see Sarah's ghost. I see a future. He pulled out a ring. Simple gold band. New, Evelyn Hart. Will you marry me? She looked at the ring, at him. Ask me the question you asked through the window. What? That night, when you came to save me, you asked me why I chose a stranger as my groom. You said, why not the man standing before you? Ask me again. Lucas understood. Evelyn, why not the man standing before you? Because I did not know him then. She took his hand. I know him now, and I choose him. The wedding was held in May. Small ceremony, 20 guests, the entire community that mattered. Stillwater Church decorated with wildflowers, sunlight streaming through the windows. Martha Crawford stood as Evelyn's witness. Tom Crawford stood for Lucas. Clara had returned from Ohio just for this day. Healthy and smiling, she sat in the front pew with tears streaming down her face. Happy tears. Reverend Whitmore performed the ceremony. Do you, Lucas Reed, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Evelyn Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. Lucas kissed her, not brief and respectful, deep and real, like a man who had almost lost her and knew what she was worth. The congregation cheered. The celebration lasted all day. Potluck dinner in the Crawford barn, dancing and laughter. The whole community celebrating two people who had survived something terrible and found each other. At sunset, Lucas and Evelyn slipped away. They rode to the ridge overlooking the ranch. Their ranch now. The valley spread below them, golden in the fading light. The house, the barn, the corrals. Home. I never thought I would have this again, Lucas said quietly. After Sarah died, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people. I never thought I would have it at all. I came here expecting survival. Nothing more. And now? Now I understand there is a difference between surviving and living. Lucas pulled her close. I love you, Evelyn Reed. It was the first time he had said it, the first time either of them had used that word. I love you too. They stayed on the ridge until the stars came out. Then they rode home together. The first year of marriage was hard. Not in the ways Evelyn had feared. Lucas was a good husband, kind, patient, willing to teach her what she needed to know about ranch life. But the work was endless. She learned to cook on the big iron stove, to preserve vegetables and smoke meat, to tend chickens and milk cows. She learned to ride properly, not the side-saddle nonsense of Boston, but the practical stride of the West. She learned to shoot. Lucas insisted on it. Every woman should know how to protect herself, he said. This is rough country. She did not argue. Winter was brutal. Snow piled in drifts as high as her chest. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the basin overnight. Lucas worked from before dawn until after dark, checking cattle, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling feed. Evelyn worked beside him when she could, learned that survival in Montana required strength she had not known she possessed. But spring came, and with it, new life. Evelyn discovered she was pregnant in March. She told Lucas that evening by the fire. His face went through a journey. Shock, fear, joy. Are you sure? I am sure. When? September, I think. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. I was afraid this would never happen, he said. After Sarah, after everything, I was afraid too. And now? Now I am just happy. The pregnancy was easier than Evelyn had expected. Mrs. Patterson, the doctor's wife, checked on her regularly. Martha Crawford shared advice from her own 4 pregnancies. Clara wrote long letters from Ohio, full of excitement about becoming an aunt. And Lucas hovered. He would not let her carry anything heavier than a teacup, would not let her ride after the 5th month, would not let her climb stairs without someone nearby. "I am pregnant, not dying," Evelyn told him finally. "You have to stop treating me like glass. I cannot help it. I am terrified." "Of what?" "Of losing you. Of something going wrong. Of history repeating itself." She understood then. Sarah had died in a riding accident while pregnant with their first child. That loss had broken something in Lucas, something that was only now beginning to heal. She took his hands. "I am not Sarah. This is not that pregnancy. We are going to be fine." "How do you know?" "Because I refuse to let fear win. We have been through too much to stop being happy now." Lucas pulled her close. "I love you," he whispered. "I know. Now stop hovering and let me make dinner." The baby came in early September, a long labor, painful and terrifying. Mrs. Patterson served as midwife. Martha Crawford held Evelyn's hand through the worst of it. Lucas paced in the kitchen, wearing a path in the floor. At 3 in the morning, a baby's cry split the silence. Mrs. Patterson emerged, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Reed, you have a daughter." Lucas pushed past her into the bedroom. Evelyn lay in bed, exhausted but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the smallest, most perfect human being he had ever seen. "She is beautiful," he said. "She is ours." He sat on the bed beside them, one arm around Evelyn, one finger touching the baby's tiny hand. The baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "What should we name her?" Evelyn looked at him. "I thought Sarah." Lucas's breath caught. "You would do that?" "She was important to you. She was brave and she fought for the truth." "I think that is a name worth honoring." Lucas wiped his eyes. "Sarah Jane Reed. After my mother and yours." "That is perfect." They sat together in the lamplight, watching their daughter sleep. Outside, the Montana sky was full of stars. And inside, a family had been born. 2 years passed. The ranch prospered. Lucas had bought some of Webb's former land at auction after the trial. Good grazing, good water. Evelyn had transformed the house, garden flourishing, chickens producing. A new room added for the second baby coming in the spring. Little Sarah was walking now, talking, getting into everything. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. Some days, Evelyn would stand on the ridge overlooking the valley and marvel at how much had changed. 2 years ago, she had been a desperate woman with nothing but a trunk and a letter from a stranger. Now she was a wife, a mother, a rancher, happy. One morning in April, a letter arrived. Evelyn opened it at the kitchen table while Sarah played at her feet. "Dear Mrs. Reed, my name is Eleanor Price. I am a widow with 2 children. My husband died 6 months ago and left us with nothing but debt. I saw your notice in the newspaper, the one about the Reed Foundation. I do not expect charity. I only ask for a chance, a way forward. Whatever you can offer, I will work to deserve. I have heard what you did, how you survived, how you help other women who are in desperate circumstances. Please, if there is anything you can do. My children are so hungry. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Price." Evelyn read the letter twice. Then she showed it to Lucas that evening. "We should help her," she said. "Agreed. What do you have in mind?" "Train fare west, room at the Crawford place until she finds her footing. Work in town if she wants it. Mrs. Patterson needs help at the general store. And if she needs more, then we give more." The Reed Foundation had been Lucas's idea. After the trial, they had talked about what to do with the money recovered from Marcus Webb's estate, Evelyn's father's land claims, Webb's own assets seized by the territorial court. It was a substantial sum. "We could expand the ranch," Lucas had said, "buy more cattle, more land." "Or we could help people," Evelyn had replied. "Women in desperate circumstances, women who need a chance. Like you needed a chance, like I needed a chance, like Clara, like all the women Marcus destroyed." Lucas had thought about it. Then he had smiled. "Let us do both. The foundation was simple. They provided money for train fare, temporary housing, job connections. Whatever a woman needed to start over. No questions asked, no judgment, just help. In 2 years, they had assisted 12 women. Some came west and made new lives. Some used the money to return to family back east. Some needed only a small loan to get through a difficult time. All of them were grateful, and all of them, without exception, passed it on. A woman who had been helped by the foundation would help another woman when she could. Who would help another? Who would help another? It was spreading. Eleanor Price arrived in June. She was thin and worn with haunted eyes and 2 children clinging to her skirts. A boy of 8 and a girl of 6. Evelyn met her at the station. The same station where she had stood alone 2 years ago waiting for a stranger.
Mrs. Price? Yes. You must be Mrs. Reed. Welcome to Montana. Eleanor burst into tears. I did not think you would actually come. I did not think anyone would help. Evelyn took her hand. Someone helped me once, when I had nothing, when I was alone and afraid. She showed me that starting over was possible. Eleanor wiped her eyes. I do not know how I can ever repay you. You do not repay me. You pass it on. Someday, when you are in a position to help someone else, you help them. That is how it works. The children were staring at little Sarah, who was staring back with frank curiosity. Can I play with her? The girl asked. Of course you can. Evelyn watched the children run off together. Come, she said to Eleanor. Let me show you your new home. That summer, Evelyn's second child was born. A boy this time, strong and healthy, with a pair of lungs that could wake the whole ranch. They named him James, after Evelyn's father. James Robert Reed, Lucas said, holding his son for the first time. Named for the man who tried to stop Marcus Webb. And the man who raised me. Whatever his faults, he loved me. He tried to protect me. He would be proud of you now. I hope so. Sarah climbed onto the bed, demanding to see her baby brother. He is loud, she observed. Yes, he is. Will he always be this loud? Probably. Sarah considered this. I do not mind. He can be loud if he wants. Evelyn laughed and pulled her daughter close. Her family, her children, her life, built from the ashes of everything she had lost. One day in autumn, Evelyn rode to the Stillwater Cemetery. She had not been there since Margaret's burial. But today she had something to do. She dismounted and walked among the headstones until she found the one she was looking for. Sarah Elizabeth Reed, beloved wife, taken too soon. Evelyn knelt beside the grave. I never knew you, she said quietly. But I know you were brave. I know you died trying to find the truth. I know Lucas loved you. A breeze stirred the grass. I want you to know that he is happy now. We are happy. We have 2 beautiful children. We are building something good. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. Thank you for loving him first, for teaching him how to love. I will take care of him now. I promise. She stood. Behind her, footsteps approached. Lucas, I thought I might find you here, he said. I wanted to talk to her. What did you say? That we are happy, that I am grateful for what you had together. Lucas looked at the headstone. She would have liked you, he said. She would have admired your courage. I hope so. They stood together in silence. Then Lucas took her hand. Ready to go home? Home. The word still filled her with warmth, with gratitude, with wonder that she had found such a thing in this wild, beautiful land. Yes, she said, I am ready. They rode back to the ranch together. Their children were waiting on the porch, Sarah waving, baby James in Martha Crawford's arms, their home, their family, their future, built on second chances and stubborn hope. 5 years after Evelyn Hart first stepped off a train in Stillwater, Montana, she stood on the same platform, waiting, not for herself this time, for another woman. The train pulled in with a shriek of brakes and a hiss of steam. Passengers descended,
cowboys and miners, families and businessmen. And there, a woman in a worn dress, clutching a carpet bag. Looking around with the same expression Evelyn remembered seeing in her own reflection 5 years ago. Fear, desperation, hope so fragile it might shatter at a touch. "Mrs. Caldwell?" The woman looked up. "Yes." "Are you Mrs. Reed?" "I am. Welcome to Montana." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I did not know if you were real." "The letters seem too good to be true." Evelyn smiled. "I know exactly how you feel." She took the woman's arm and led her toward the wagon. "Let me tell you a story," she said, "about a woman who came here 5 years ago with nothing but a trunk and a desperate hope." The Reed Foundation had grown. What started as a small fund to help desperate women had become something larger. A network of women across the territory who helped each other, who provided jobs, housing, support. The Stillwater Women's Aid Society, they called it now. Evelyn served as president. Martha Crawford as treasurer. Clara, who had returned to Montana 2 years ago with a schoolteacher husband, served as secretary. They had helped over 50 women in 5 years. Some had become ranchers, some had become businesswomen, some had married well, some had simply found peace. All of them had found a second chance. And Marcus Webb? He had been executed at the territorial prison in Deer Lodge 3 years ago. Evelyn had not attended, had not wanted to. But she had received word when it was done. She had felt nothing, no satisfaction, no closure, just relief that it was over. The evening after Mrs. Caldwell's arrival, Evelyn sat on the porch watching the sunset. Lucas joined her, settling into the chair beside hers. "Another one saved," he said. "Another one given a chance. What she does with it is up to her. She will make something of herself. They all do. You choose well." Evelyn smiled. "I have help. Martha has good instincts, and Clara knows what desperation looks like." They sat in comfortable silence. After a while, Lucas spoke again. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" "What do you mean?" "If you had not come to Montana, if you had found another way out of your troubles in Boston." Evelyn considered. "Sometimes. Late at night, I think about how close I came to disaster. You almost married a monster. I almost died in a cellar next to a dead woman's bones." Lucas took her hand. "But you did not." "No, I did not. Because a taciturn cowboy came to the station when no one else did. Because he warned me when he did not have to. Because he fought for me when I could not fight alone. I was not much of a fighter before you came along. Neither was I. I guess we learned together." The children were inside, getting ready for bed. Sarah, now 6, reading to her brother James. Baby Lily, just 1, already asleep in her cradle. 3 children in 5 years. A home full of noise and chaos and love, more than Evelyn had ever dared to hope for. "Do you remember what you asked me?" she said. "When?" "That night at Webb's ranch. Through the window. You asked me why I chose a stranger as my groom. Why not the man standing before me?" Lucas smiled. "I remember. I gave you the wrong answer that night." "What was the right answer?" "That I was too afraid to recognize a good man when I saw one, that I was so focused on survival that I could not see the difference between safety and danger, that it took almost dying to teach me what matters." "And what matters?" Evelyn turned to face him. "This. Us. The life we have built. The family we have made. The people we have helped." She took his hand. "You asked me to choose you. I did. I choose you again every day. And I will keep choosing you for the rest of my life." Lucas pulled her close. "I love you, Evelyn Reed. I love you too." They sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out over Montana. The same stars Evelyn had seen on that first terrible night, when she was alone and afraid and riding toward a monster's trap. Now she was home, and the stars had never looked more beautiful. 10 years after Evelyn Hart became Evelyn Reed, She stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. Behind her, the ranch spread out in prosperous plenty. The original house had been expanded twice. A second barn stood where Marcus Webb's empire had once loomed. Below, children were playing. Sarah, now 11, teaching her younger siblings to ride. James at 8, already a better horseman than his father had been at twice his age. Lily at 6, fearless and wild. And the twins, Thomas and Rose, just learning to walk. 5 children. Lucas had joked that they were building their own small army. Evelyn had not disagreed. She heard hoofbeats behind her. Lucas rode up and dismounted. "Thought I might find you here. I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how far we have come. How different everything is from what I expected." "Better or worse?" She smiled. "Better. Infinitely better." Lucas stood beside her, looking out at the valley. "I was going through some old papers this morning," he said. "Found something I thought you might want to see." He handed her a yellowed envelope. Evelyn recognized the handwriting immediately. Marcus Webb's elegant script. "My first letter from him," she said quietly. "I thought I destroyed this years ago, but Foster found it when we cleared out the old Webb place. She kept it. Thought you might want it someday." Evelyn unfolded the letter. Read the familiar words. "I offer comfort, security, and respect. In return, I ask only for honesty and companionship." She remembered how those words had seemed like salvation, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. She had not known it was attached to an anchor. "He was so convincing," she said. "If I had not met you, if you had not warned me, I would have married him. I would be dead. But you did meet me. I did warn you. And you are very much alive. Because of you. Because of us." Lucas took her hand. "We saved each other, Evelyn. That is what partners do. Partners." The word had meant something very different 10 years ago. A business arrangement, a practical solution to mutual problems. Now it meant something deeper, a bond forged in danger and tempered by time, a love that had grown from necessity into something unshakable. She tore the letter in half, then in half again. She let the pieces scatter on the wind. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said quietly. "You do not get to haunt me anymore." The wind carried the fragments away, over the valley, toward the distant mountains. Gone. Finally. Completely gone. That evening, the whole community gathered at the Reed Ranch. A celebration, the 10th anniversary of the Stillwater Women's Aid Society. 53 women helped over the past decade, 27 of them present tonight, with their families, and more coming every year. Evelyn stood to speak. The crowd fell silent. 10 years ago, she began, I stepped off a train in this town with nothing but a trunk and a desperate hope. I thought I was coming here to survive. I did not know I was coming here to live. She looked out at the faces. Friends, neighbors, women she had helped, women who had helped her. I was deceived by a monster who wanted to destroy me. But I was saved by a man who showed me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear. She looked at Lucas standing at the back of the room with Lily in his arms. And I learned that the greatest strength is not standing alone. It is reaching out a hand to someone who is falling and saying, I have been where you are. Let me help. She raised her glass. To second chances, to new beginnings, to the women who refuse to be victims. The crowd raised their glasses. To second chances. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Evelyn and Lucas sat on the porch, the same porch where they had sat 100 times before. But somehow it never got old. Happy? Lucas asked. More than I ever imagined possible. No regrets? Evelyn thought about it. Boston, the auction, the train, the platform where no one waited, the man who showed up anyway, the danger, the fear, the fight, the love that grew from ashes. One regret, she said. What is that? That it took almost dying to find you. Lucas laughed softly. I would say it was worth it. So would I. She leaned into him, his arm around her shoulders. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley. Another train bringing another woman to Montana. Another stranger making a desperate choice. Another life hanging in the balance. Maybe she will find us, Evelyn said. Maybe we can help her too. If she needs help, we will find her. How do you know? Because that is what we do. That is who we are. Evelyn smiled. The woman who chose a stranger as her groom, the cowboy who asked why not the man standing before you. That is how the story ends, she said, with a question that became an answer. With a stranger who became a husband, with a desperate woman who became strong. Lucas kissed her forehead. That is how our story ends. No. Evelyn looked at the stars. That is how it continues. The train whistle faded into the distance. The stars burned bright over Montana, and Evelyn Reed, born Evelyn Hart in a city that felt like another lifetime, held her husband's hand and watched the future unfold before them. A future built on courage and hope, and the simple truth that no one has to face their darkness alone. She had come to Montana to survive. She had stayed to live. And that, she thought, as the night wrapped around them like a blessing, made all the difference. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.